Hello, everyone, and welcome to another episode of Ask a STEM Sister. This episode, we are super delighted to have Dr. Yasmine Daniels with us. And, we've had, hashtag Black and Chem previously, but we are bringing that back because we have Dr. Daniels, who holds a PhD in analytical chemistry, and she's going to tell us all about her journey and her very interesting path to becoming an industrial hygienist. Welcome, Dr. Daniels, and thank you so
Thank
much for
you.
being here. Awesome. So I'm going to go ahead and jump right in because I'm really excited just to chat about, your path and how you, kind of ended up with such a unique job title. But I'm curious about kind of your beginnings and how you ended up, choosing your undergrad major, how you chose your undergrad institution, and just what that buildup was like, entering into college and kind of knowing what you wanted to major in and where you wanted to go.
Yeah, that's a good question. In school, I always thought that I would probably go the medicine route. I
Okay.
thought I would be a medical doctor because I was good in science. I like math. I like STEM. So, you get the grades in science, and automatically people assume that you're going to go to medical school, and that's kind of the direction that I was pushed in. And I'm sure a lot of scientists can attest to that. And so one summer, I actually did an internship while I was in college at a local hospital where I shadowed a pediatrician. Um, and I think during that time, it was during that time that I realized that I was a germaphobe. I did not like being sick people, and deal with blood. And I guess it doesn't really occur to you that that's what you're doing. It's just sort of like
Yes.
the prestige title was what I was drawn to, right? And everyone's like, "Oh, you're going to make a lot of money. You'll be a doctor." Blah blah, and not even really knowing that you could be other types of doctors too at that time, because at
Sure.
that time that's really all that was kind of forced on you. So anyway, I did the internship. It was a great internship. It was a really nice institution, but I personally did not like that experience. I didn't like dealing with sick patients. That whole
Mm,
experience was not. I knew I could not do that, and I was very fortunate and thankful that I took the opportunity to do that internship, because that allowed me to save a lot of time. Because had I gone through studying
yeah.
for the MCAT, doing all of that, and then getting into medical school, doing my clinicals, and realizing I didn't want to do this, I would have probably have wasted so much time and had to have gone back to the drawing board and started over. So yeah, so that's sort of where I had the defining moment, or the turning point. And so while I was in school, I actually was simultaneously doing independent study research for my program.
Oh,
So I was, excuse me, I was in an honors program, and in order to graduate within that program in college, you had to also do an independent study, like sort of like a mini thesis within your
yes.
major. That's the only way that you would actually get the sort of the honors seal on your diploma at the end, or your degree, sorry, at the end. Um, so I was a chemistry major. A lot of pre-meds are usually like, some type of science major,
Yeah.
psychology, chemistry, biology, something like that. So um, I had to do a thesis, independent thesis study in chemistry. And I had been doing that. And sort of like, just, it's a very long story that goes with that. But the short version of it is, I ended up applying to graduate schools, none of which I got into. I didn't get into the ones that I wanted to go to. Um, and so I got into a point where I was getting ready to graduate in my senior year, and I didn't really know what was next. Like, what do you do with a degree in chem? Do I go work as a lab tech somewhere? Do I start
Yeah.
some pharmaceutical company? Do I do like a post bac, which is like, it's kind of like a postdoc, but it's, after you get your bachelor's degree, you go back and you get some more credits, or you get some more, more experience so that you can actually apply again to graduate school. So I was torn. I didn't really know what was next. And I remember speaking to my mentor at the time, whose lab I was working in for the independent study research.
Nice.
And I mentioned to him how, like, discouraging it was. I didn't really know what I wanted to do. And he said, well, you're doing great research here. Why don't you just consider applying to the graduate school here? And I sat and thought about it for a little, and I was just kind of like, all of my friends are going to all of these, like, throwing these Ivy League names at me. And, it's kind of like, I'm
Mhm.
gonna stay here, that it was that feeling of like, how am I going to tell my friends that I'm staying here? And it's sort of like, you didn't want to be the loser, I guess. And, I don't
Yeah,
like using the word, but that was the feeling that I was having. Um, and so I actually, it turned out to be the best decision that I probably could have ever made. So, one thing I like to tell people is sometimes the things that you should be doing, they're right under your nose, and you really just have to stop and
absolutely.
listen, or stop and sniff, or, and stop and just let it happen. So I ended up actually applying to the graduate school where I went to my undergraduate institution, and I got in. It was a very quick process. The application was electronic, so that was a quick turnaround, luckily for me. So I didn't have to wait, for several weeks before graduation and not knowing where I was going.
Gotcha.
Um, and I got in. I ended up staying while I was in the graduate program there. So I ended up basically continuing my
Okay.
honors thesis. I expanded on that as part of my dissertation and sort of developed into a really big project. So much so that we gained interest from international labs. So we there was a lab in France that did a lot of green chemistry work, and the research that I was doing was also in that field. So it basically revolved around cleaning water using biocompatible particles. So I was designing these inorganic particles and functionalizing them with these ligands that could make them more selective for toxic metals, so like lead and cadmium and nickel, and high levels of copper, things like that. So I made these salts, and when you use these salts to basically essentially filter water, so you're taking out these metals from
Uh-huh.
water, the idea is that you can take these salts, which are biocompatible, and you can repurpose them. So you can reuse them in the environment. So you're not necessarily creating waste, you're valorizing is the term that we used in chemistry. So it basically the whole project was under an umbrella called environmental remediation. So you're basically remedying the environment. And so there was a lab in France that had a lot of research going on in that field. And they also had some really fancy equipment and tools and analytical measuring devices. I was actually an analytical chemist. So basically, one of my jobs was to try to figure out how we could analyze these particles that I was making using the tools that we had. And the school that I went to, we had some good stuff, but we could have probably used more, resources
Sure.
within our program. So it was nice to be able to work with a different lab that had those resources. So I basically, they gave me the opportunity to pack up my samples, and I got on a plane and I went to France for 2 months, and I
Wow.
did it was amazing. It was a great experience. And I mean, it's just an example of science opening the door and presenting you
Absolutely.
with different opportunities. So I would have never have known that this opportunity would be before me had I not taken that leap of faith and stayed within that program. So like I said, it was the best, and it wasn't just the best decision because I got to go to France. Obviously, the research developed into a great project. It's still actually ongoing. I was recently in touch with the professor there, and he talks a lot about the research, and it's there are a lot of students who came after me who've continued the research too. So it's nice to see that um, that I was involved in something that it seems to be making a difference, and that's exciting for me. That's the part of science that I really enjoyed. So that's sort of
That
like a
is
little bit of how I got where I was, which is a little weird because I'm not actually doing that work currently. As you mentioned earlier, I'm an industrial hygienist. So there's bit of a transition between me getting my PhD and working as an environmental/analytical chemist, and then going into the field of industrial hygiene.
gotcha. I just love that story, and I think what stands out to me is, you having that mentor, to be able to, kind of bounce ideas off of, or who maybe saw something in you that you couldn't see in yourself, or didn't necessarily have the, it had it in your view, to go one way or the other. And I think it just speaks to how important it is for us to have those individuals in our careers early on, and to have someone to, encourage us in that way. You mentioned, I saw that you went to Hunter College undergrad. Could you tell us about what it was like being you were biology? Did you switch to biology or and chemistry? I think I saw in your bio you did biology there. How was it in your major? As a woman in STEM, as a Black woman, how was that in your undergraduate experience, and then going into graduate school? And were there any hurdles that you had to overcome as a young woman and as a Black woman in STEM?
Yeah. So I did take biology. I was okay at biology, but I did never call myself a biologist. I enjoyed more the like physical science, like chemistry, physics. I enjoyed those sciences a little more. So I was actually a chemistry major. And when you're a chemistry major, you obviously have to take some of the other sciences as prerequisites. So I did have to take biochem, and a little bit of psychology and all those other sciences as well. But being a science major as a woman of color, um, it was definitely difficult. A lot of my classes, a lot of the science students that I typically had in my classes did not always look like me. And the ones, especially who excelled for some reason, did not look like me. But my school, Hunter, as you mentioned, it a program. I think a lot of schools typically have programs that provide resources to minority students. And the program that I was in is called the MBRS program. And it's very similar to the MARC program, Minority Access to Research Careers. I believe these are NI programs. And so the schools receive grants to be able to provide funding to minority students who want to pursue careers in research. And so you are provided a stipend as a student. So you can, instead of perhaps after school going and working your part-time job, trying to make ends meet, oftentimes these are the things that we struggle with as minority
Yeah.
students. Um, the program provides a stipend, so you utilize your time working in a lab and advance your career, or your education, and building those credentials that you will need in order to pursue those STEM careers. So the school that I went to had that program, which I was so fortunate to have. And so not only did the program offer resources, but I got to be around students who looked like me, who were also in science, and that in itself was very encouraging, because you saw, I still have a lot of friends to this day, all many of whom are PhDs actually, who were in that program
Awesome.
with me. So it just goes to show that these programs are very well needed, and they're successful because they actually encourage us to pursue these careers. We stuck together, we went to conferences together, we went to professional development workshops together. We studied together because a lot of us took the science
Mhm.
classes together. And so we provided support to each other. We understood each other because we were going through a lot of the same struggles, socioeconomic struggles, things like that. So I think, for schools that don't have these programs, there's always a variation of it. I didn't go to an
Yeah.
HBCU, but I know that these schools are designed to facilitate similar type of opportunity to its students. So I think there are a lot of schools that have diversity offices, and there's a lot of funding for that. And I think that's one of the best ways that minority students can get support in order for them to persevere. And that was one of the big influencers along my path.
Awesome. Yeah, I can totally relate, especially to, being maybe at a predominantly white institution and finding your group of folks that, who support each other, and you have similar goals and you're like-minded and you're able to, not only use the resources of the institution, but use each other as resources. And so it's so refreshing to hear that you were, able to take advantage of that. So, I want to talk a little bit about your, forays after graduate school and what it was like, after you graduated, you got that shiny PhD. How did you navigate now going out into the workforce? How did you kind of look at what opportunities were going to be out there for you now that you had, got that nice, degree after your name?
Yeah. So you can probably attest to this, but I think when you reach the point where you're ABD, augmentation, you have all these things going through your head about, okay, what am I going to do? What path am I going to take? You start talking to people who have gone through the process. You start speaking to mentors, and you start reaching out to labs, trying to see if you would be a good fit for them for their postdoc programs. So typically, there are three paths that a lot of PhDs take. They either go down the academic path, so they go into academia, or they go into industry, pharma, they work for some sort of tech company, or they go into government. And so these were the three things that I was in that. I didn't I didn't really know which one of these three things I fit in. And so I attended a lot of conferences, trying to network with people, trying to, go to these career fairs, trying to see which ones sort of fit I wanted to do. Because, like you said, you have this shiny degree and you're not sure if you want to stay. And everyone tells you that you have to do a postdoc. Like that's sort of like
Yeah.
drilled into your brain. If you want to do anything, you have to do a postdoc. People tell you that. And I have my own on that. You're too. But needless to say, I did a postdoc. So I did a postdoc, and I spent a lot of time at the bench doing research. Um, I churned out a lot of data. You publish. At that point, you're unsure whether you're going to be going back into academia. You want to have a lot of publications available if you do go into academia, because that's one of the
Absolutely.
for you to get grants when you're a professor, you're a young professor, you want publications under your belt. So during your postdoc, a lot of data churning, you do a lot of experiments, you make a lot of different papers. And so, that was kind of the goal at that point, do as much research as papers out. And then when I get to the end of postdoc, I try to decide what I'm going to do next. So after doing all research and basically being married to my test tubes, because that's what it felt like. You're at the bench every single day, weighing things out, pipetting. One of my friends used to joke around that he had pipetter's elbow, which is just like you're just going back and forth, at the bench
Yeah.
from one tube to the next. So I realized that I miss the interaction. I
Yeah.
missed being, in the presence of people all the time, talking to people. I like talking about science. I actually teach chemistry as an adjunct professor, and I've done that, since I was in graduate school, and I haven't stopped. So that's one of the things that I like doing. I like communicating about science, and I got to do that in a sense, but I spent a lot of time in the lab. And so I think that was sort of the deciding factor for me in terms of whether I would stay in the lab setting or I would venture out into a different area that allowed me to do a little bit of science, but also allowed me to connect more with people and to talk more, to feel like I was making a bigger impact. And so at that point, I started searching for jobs because I was getting to the end of my postdoc. And I started to look for, different types of jobs that had a sprinkle of science, but also a lot of, communicating, interpersonal skills, like these sorts of things that I
Yeah.
prioritized. And I came across the industrial hygiene position not knowing too much what it was, but it seemed
I was
doable
about to
because it
say, how
actually
did you
seemed very
know?
similar to what I was. Yes, it seemed very similar to what I was already doing
Oh,
because I was an analytical chemist doing taking analytical measurements in the lab of all the different samples that I was creating and mixing. And so, in the field of industrial hygiene, you also have to take measurements using analytical tools. However, instead of using these huge instruments like we do in analytical chemistry labs, as an IH or industrial hygienist, you take these portable tools, these pumps and, you know, these devices, these meters, and you go out and you take sort of field measurements of, hazards and chemicals and things like that. So there was a lot of overlap between those two fields, but it also provided me the opportunity to do what I wanted to do a little bit more, which was to listen to people a little bit more in real time. So as an industrial hygienist, which I can explain what that is. I don't know if too many people know what that field is. So basically,
yeah.
it's this of anticipating, evaluating, affecting, and controlling workplace conditions to prevent or avoid illnesses and injuries. And so I think that's more like a technical definition. So basically, you can go into a workplace and you assess the health hazards of that workplace. And it can be anything. It could be someone working in a factory, mixing large drums of, I don't know, nail polish base, or it can be someone working in a kitchen for like a sort of like a restaurant kitchen, working there on flame. That's also a health hazard because you're working there very high heat, and that can present a hazard as well. So you would be assessing and anticipating different kinds of hazards that may occur and providing ways of controlling those hazards or preventing those people from encountering or being exposed to those hazardous conditions. And so in doing that, you take lots of measurements, you do a lot of analytical analyses. You assess these things and you try to figure out what the best way is. And sometimes, because typically this isn't a place of business, you would have to take into account costs. So you have to factor that in as well. What would be more cost effective for your client, let's say, whoever it is that you're doing these assessments for. So that's essentially what the field of industrial hygiene is. But like I said, it's a little bit more real time because you're actually communicating things to them because these people are actively working. It's not as if, in a lab you have a little bit of time and repeat the experiments and then you can work on the write up, submit your article, get revisions. In this line of work, like it's a little more real time. You need to give them answers like depending on the information that you provide. If you're not careful to provide enough discretion and control and information, accurate information, you might be jeopardizing someone's health or their life. So there's a little more pressure there, but it's a lot more. I think it's a lot more rewarding for me personally. I do enjoy what I do.
Awesome. And I think, you being able to recognize in yourself, what things you were actually looking to get out of a role was super important. I think in a lot of these, interviews and discussions, we've found that being able to really honestly assess yourself and what you actually love and the types of environments that you thrive in is really important. I want to talk a little bit about, some of the things you do, outside of your, just day-to-day job. You're also an author, and you've actually written about building your self-esteem in science. So can you tell us just a little bit about, how you decided to become a different type of author? We're used to, scientific publications, but how you chose to become a different type of author and how you landed on focusing on, that part about, building your self-esteem as we're seeing is really important in STEM. And also, if you could talk a little bit about what you think young women, particularly those that are thinking about going into STEM, what should they be doing now to, get prepared for a career in STEM, like you have?
Mm-hmm. Okay. So to answer the first part of your question, how I went about, I guess, becoming an author of a children's book is I realized that what influenced me the most throughout my career has been those people who have really pushed and supported me. And so I think it's really important to have that in your corner. It's important to have a good support system. It's important to have good mentors, and you can have more than one. And so I wanted to give that back to someone else who's coming after me. That's a very big passion of mine, mentoring. I mentor a group of young girls currently between the ages of 5 and 12, and it's one of the most rewarding things that I've done. And it's amazing when I sit with them and talk to them about their different life goals and things like that, and just to see their genuine expressions and responses unscripted, it's amazing. And so I feel like it's very important to push that in young people, because you never really know what young person you might be influencing, even if you're not intentionally trying to do so. You could very well have a big impact on them. And so that's one of my passions. And obviously, my other passion is science. So I do enjoy science. I really love talking about science. I like sort of breaking down the stereotypes about science to people, because I think when I went into science, people made it seem as though it was something that only really smart people would do, or geeks. And that's not to say, I don't think I'm smart. It's just that I don't necessarily think that it's something that people should shy away from because they might think it's too difficult. So I'm definitely a strong advocate for science, and also a strong advocate for supporting and mentoring youth and pushing them to to achieving their potentials and their goals. And so what better way than to combine those two passions than to create a book for children, encouraging them to pursue careers in STEM. Essentially where the idea for creating the children's book in STEM came from. It was basically my two passions coming together. Um, and so I wanted it to be a fun book. I wanted it to be an interesting story that they could relate to. I wanted to diversify the characters a little bit, make them, characters of color, me and people who look like them as well, which you don't often see in a lot of
Yeah.
science books for kids. And so, based on a lot of the feedback that I've heard from a lot of children and parents equally enjoying it and are liking what they see. And I'm excited to continue to provide these books, because it is a series. So there are more that are coming out. I can't say when, but we're actively working on that. But the second thank you. The second part of your question, about how we can to become involved in STEM, I kind of touched on this a little bit earlier. I think one of the big things is trying to get involved in some type of volunteer work. Um, and I know now with the pandemic, things have changed a lot. So, I say that with a little bit of hesitation, because I'm not quite sure exactly what different schools and institutions have in place as far as their policies for having volunteers or students come in. But that's sort of how it works. And it doesn't hurt to even reach out and ask, if they are accepting, even if it's just someone to review some articles and help them, organize journal club, or to just get involved in any way that you can, on a voluntary basis. You'd be surprised at how much you learn at a very early age, even if it's just understanding how it is you go about reading a science article. There's a lot of art to that. These articles can be very dense and very difficult to understand. You have to know how to break them down and really, understand the details of them. You don't necessarily read it from cover to cover or first page to last page, as scientists, and you can probably attest to this. attest to this also. You may want to go to section first, or you may want to read the abstract and then jump around and then come back. So there are lots of things that students can learn early on before they actually jump into being a full-on scientist. But that really helps you to define what you want to do, because even in saying that you want to be a scientist, it's such a diverse field that you don't
Absolutely.
always know that it's the subject area that you want to stick with when you start doing it. So, I worked in several different labs in several different areas. I've worked in a psychology lab. I've worked with rats, monkeys, opossums, like I said earlier, nanoparticles. I've worked with tobacco, cigarettes, doing research on that. So there have been several different projects that I worked on, and they each have individually helped me to define what it is that I'm doing now, because I learned something from each of those things. So just because you may be working over the summer, it doesn't necessarily mean that you will do that as a profession, but you'll definitely get something out of it that will help you move into the next level of your career.
I 100% echo that. I think that exposure is everything. And sometimes the people that we think are so smart, like, oh my gosh, they're brilliant. It's not that they're so much smarter than we are. They were literally exposed to some of these concepts and some of these experiences before we were. They've just seen these things before and been in those environments before. And so the more exposure you can get, and the earlier you can get that exposure, I think is huge. And being able to interact with folks who have had these different experiences just um, broadens your own experience as well. So I just want to thank you so much for sharing your journey, Dr. Daniels. I am really excited about these books, that there are more coming. So before we go, I want you to let everybody
Yes.
know where we can follow you, how we can keep up with you on social media and otherwise.
Yes, so absolutely. If you'd like to follow me, I am on Instagram, and I'm also on YouTube at Classy Chemist. Um, and I'm also on Facebook and Twitter at Classy Cheminist. So it's sort of like a spin on the word feminist. But if you would like to get a copy of the book, and this is actually what the book looks like, it's called Building My Self-Esteem in Science, and you can grab a copy of it on Amazon. So you can just type in the name Self-Esteem in Science, or you can type my name, Yasmin Daniels, and the book should show up.
Perfect. Sounds like a perfect stocking stuffer. So definitely, you guys check that out. Definitely check out Dr. Daniels on all of her social media. Also, if you've liked this video, go ahead and hit the thumbs up and subscribe for more videos like this. We'll be doing interviews just like this in the upcoming weeks. So stay tuned, and we'll see you in the next video. Thank you all so much.